everybody. Welcome. This is the Fishbeck Learning Exchange. I'm Chris Freeland. And joining me on the podcast today is Kristen Nyht, a senior project manager in Fishbeck's architectural department. And as you will soon see, Kristen is passionate about designing spaces that are functional and beautiful, yes, but also, and maybe most importantly, sustainable, regenerative, and resilient. We're going to unpack what those terms mean, see how they apply to real world projects, and learn how Fishbeck staff can talk to clients about integrating those principles into their designs. So, Kristen, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Okay, and this has been a long time coming. You were excited to get on this show, I'll say, in our first season. And we tried to make it happen, and there were just some scheduling things. You were very patient, and I'm thankful that we could make this work. So, again, glad you made it. Let's start off with just a little bit about you. For those that don't know you or know what you're into, can you share your background and what led you into or inspired you to pursue architecture and urban planning as a career in the first place?
Sure. So I grew up, I have a clear memory of walking around the neighborhood with my mom. My sister was in the stroller. And I would look at houses and think, I like this part of the house, but not that part. I would move these things around. And I just grew up loving buildings. I didn't know what that was at first. And then I said, oh, I found out that's architecture. I said, I think I want to study architecture. My father tried so hard to convince me out of it. But nope, architecture held as a passion. And then in college, I happened to stumble on a mentor who was an urban planning professor. And I said, well, cities are like buildings, but just bigger. There's more, right? And so then I started doing architecture and urban planning. So that's what I did in college. I was a dual major, and now I'm a licensed architect and a certified urban planner today.
That I had never thought about looking at a city as just a bigger building. So that you would just kind of design on the fly as you're walking around as a child.
Yes.
And that's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And what you mentioned your dad, what did he try to push, like medicine, law?
Yes. Oh yeah. He
typical
wanted me to be
dads.
a doctor.
Well, astronaut.
And he said, because you care so much about people. I said, yeah, but then I would lose a patient and I'd be crushed. I can't go into that profession. No, buildings are better. It's still problem solving for people, but just in a built environment way and not a medical way.
Right. And when the building gets demolished, there's probably no tears shed, right? Maybe. If it's a favorite building, maybe.
Right. I haven't had a building demolished yet in my career.
Oh, I should do that too. Yeah.
I have to also assume it will happen at some point.
Maybe just get reused, repurposed.
That's better. Yes.
Ideal, right?
I like that.
Okay, so was there a particular moment maybe in your schooling or maybe early on in your career when your interest was piqued or sparked in we'll say the most general term I can, the sustainable kind of arena? Sure.
It was a growing interest partly through school because I think, of course, younger generation have to change the world. I want to do better.
Right.
And then in one of the first firms I worked at, ended up designing a library for Ann Arbor that is the first operational green roof in Michigan.
Really? The first one?
The first one. Actually we beat Ford by several months. But Ford definitely had the biggest one. But we beat Ford in terms of operational. It was up and running first. And that's where I really had peaked in, okay, I want to do more of this. How can I do more of that?
How did your early experiences then shape your perspective on what's important about sustainability?
Sustainability can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, but it's become kind of a political, charging point too, where people maybe even don't want the word sustainable. And usually then I say, okay, I'll use high performance buildings. You want to save money in paying bills? Almost always the client's answer to that question is yes. Please show me how I can save money. And so high performance buildings, they're accomplishing the same things as sustainability. I may just not be using that term.
Okay. And that was an aspect I hadn't thought of. I was thinking too, to add to that, of just almost a saturated marketplace of ideas, right? Or words. Like when I hear sustainable design, it's almost like, yeah, I know what that is.
Right.
Now, of course, especially when compared to you, I don't know what it is, right? And I'm about to learn a lot more. But when I hear, and our audience will too, when I hear sustainable, I think, yeah, okay, so it's good for the planet or what have you. So let's take time now then to describe these differences. Because at the beginning, I said sustainable, I said regenerative, and I said resilient.
Yes.
So let's do a little exercise, okay? A little role play. Let's say I'm a client with a potential project, and I've come across you. I don't know, and we're talking about potential, and I have a pretty good budget. Not peanuts, not shoot for the moon, but I'm reasonable, and I'm interested in hearing about it.
Sure.
The different ways that I could implement a design that's good for the environment.
Okay.
How would you approach these three in particular? How would you define them for me?
So we often tout that we build to meet or exceed the building code. And meeting the building code means you are designing the worst legally possible building. Which sounds terrible, right?
Right.
Like, why would I want to design the least? But but building codes are designed as a floor. This is like the bare minimum that you can do. So exceeding should be the norm because we want to all do better in what we do every day.
Excellence, right?
Yeah. And so sustainability is the next step up. It's saying, let's do less harm to the environment, design better environments for the people that have less chemicals, better air quality. These are things that most people want in their buildings. And then for a client, it's just a question of, I want this, but I think I can't afford it. And so those conversations have to be, what is the most important thing to you that you care the most about when it comes to sustainability? Is if I'm designing a healthcare facility, I may care about how patients recover. Patients recover faster if they have access to daylight, views, and natural environments. Gardens are a big thing. Studies have been done. Patients that are in a hospital room with little to no natural light recover slower. So when I'm talking to a healthcare client, I can bring that kind of information forward and say, would you like your patients healthier? Again, everyone's going to say yes.
You're leading them to that answer.
Leading them to that answer. And I say, okay, then the environment that's in that room is going to matter the most in getting most of the views of daylight.
You're so right about just in particular healthcare environments that are not designed by you, that are the fluorescent. It's just that's got to be unhealthy.
Yeah.
And so, the healing garden. I mean, maybe that's where you start with a healthcare client.
Right.
So there's a shift here too, and I'll throw this in there, and I'm sorry to interrupt you there. When you said talking about code, that's building to some kind of abstract, non-personal code, whereas there was a subtle shift, and I'm sure our smart audience caught this, but now it's, what about the people in the building?
Yes.
What's better for them? So it's a change in focus too.
It's people forward.
Okay.
And so sustainable can be using less water, making sure that the water that's returned to the environment is a little bit cleaner. The next step up is regenerative. So that's saying, not only am I going to say, take the stormwater that falls onto the building and put it through a stormwater detention pond, but I'm going to put it into an environment that uses natural grasses. I'm going to reconstruct as much of the environment that had been there historically to help make not only the environment more pleasant outside, and I'm almost kind of giving back to the greater system, and taking sustainability, but up a level.
So it's not just we're not harming the environment this facility is in or harming it a little less, we are actually giving back to it and trying to strengthen it.
Yes, or reconstructing it in some ways and truly doing better in all senses. So if I take materials is a good one. Building materials, there's certain things that we specify all the time. If I'm doing a sustainable building, I might take redless materials. Those are materials that cause cancer. We build with those things every day in our specifications.
I'm looking around this room now, wondering what they are.
Yes. I won't point them out to you because then you'll be really conscious about it. But we can design, sustainable buildings, one might design to not have those materials in it. Regenerative ones will go further and say, not only do I need to look at what the material is, but I look at how the material was made and how it was sourced. So that there exists in the world, the dark underbelly of construction materials is that slave labor is used in some material, when they're making the material in production. Okay, let's avoid those things, right? But that's not something that people think about every day. But regenerative design is about not only seeing what's the thing that's coming to us in the site, but tracing the steps backward to the very beginning of that material and making sure that every step along the way is socially just, not bad for the environment, but it's good for people, good for the environment, good for the long term.
Okay. So on this ladder that we're climbing here, we have, and I don't want to give the impression sustainable's low, because it's obviously a good goal.
Yes, still better.
But it's almost like building to code for the earth, right? And the people. Regenerative, is that, how many leaps are we talking? Are we talking one rung up, or have we taken a few?
It's a few rungs up.
Okay. Do we have examples, or maybe in your career have examples of specific elements of those? You've given a couple already, but are there other ones that you can give to us, like examples of that?
Sure. So I did a net zero pavilion for Kalamazoo College that's in the middle of their arboretum. And their arboretum historically had been kind of a subsistence farm and then became a tree farm. And when it was turned over to Kalamazoo College as donated, they said, well, we have this tree farm that had some areas that had never been farmed, had never been used. They were swampland in some cases. Like, okay, I'm not going to be using that. And so that was a more like historically accurate, environment, more natural, hadn't been touched by humans so much. But then they had these trees that were very clearly tree farm. They're in lines, and they're all one type. And they said, well, we want to get away from like the tree farm. So they're kind of selectively cutting down and starting to remove them. And in the building, we selected those trees and used them in the timber construction of that building. And because this is in the middle of the arboretum, ended up hiring horse and oxen to go get the trees where they were cut down, bring them out, take them across the road where there happened to have been a milling yard that did the base processing, and haul them back again and build with them.
With horse and oxen?
With horse and oxen, because there was no road.
You feel transplanted back to the frontier days.
Kind of, yes.
There's something kind of satisfying about that, right?
It's very cool.
Yeah. Cool. All right, so we've got sustainable. We've jumped up several rungs. Now, resilient, in my understanding of resilient, which is limited, is not that it's necessarily higher than regenerative, but it's almost a different aspect altogether. Yeah. Unpack that for us a little bit.
Sure. So resilience is, I try to describe it as a Venn diagram. It overlaps with sustainability and regenerative design, but it also is different from it. So resilience is, think of a rubber band. Our lives, our buildings, our communities are all these rubber bands. And when something happens, some natural disaster happens, we have to stretch to accommodate this disaster. And resilience is, how fast do I recover from that disaster? If I'm person who's living paycheck to paycheck and my car breaks down, that is a stress. It's a disaster. If I have money in the bank to get my car repaired, I can come back to normal pretty quickly. If I don't have that funds available, then it's much harder for me to say, okay, I'm going to try and live my life without a car and so on. When it comes to buildings, it's the same sort of idea, but I'm taking, instead of money in the bank, I'm talking about the systems that support us being in a building. So it's the light, HVAC, power, water, sewer. Do we have all those things in an emergency?
Okay. So it's like in practice, what is a potential emergency that can threaten something like a facility?
Sure.
And what's a design solution, a resilient design solution?
Well, at the very base level, let's talk about power.
Okay.
One of my early jobs was working at the University of Michigan Medical School for the facilities office.
Okay.
And I had the very boring job of trying to identify circuits and where they went to, like every outlet.
Electrical circuits?
Electrical circuits,
Okay.
yeah. And you say, why in the world would you have to do this? Well, the reason was because they had a power outage on a Friday in the middle of summer, and they thought the power was restored. They had generators that worked in the meantime. They thought everything was turned back on. You had to go manually go back and check to make sure all the panels are operating and all the circuits are running, all the fuses are operating, all the stuff. And they missed one. And in the process, there was a researcher that had had decades of work that had been done over generations of mice, that they had been developing this lab that was up on towards the roof that they didn't have on the maps, and it wasn't restored. And all of the mice died.
From the excessive heat.
From the excessive heat. And so when you talk about things, going back to your original question, it's like if I'm talking to a client and they say, how do you bring up sustainable regenerative design and resilient design? I say, what's important to you? It can be about the health of the people inside the building, and then it's just a degree between sustainability and regenerative design. When you're talking about resilience, it's, does this building need to be operational in case of a power outage or a flood or a heat wave? How do you make either the occupants safer or save particular parts of your building? A building code is designed for the health, safety, and welfare of the occupants. It is not about saving a building. Resilient design is about saving the building and trying to reduce the risks and vulnerabilities and make it safer for whatever that end case is.
Okay. And it seems very appropriate to be talking about resilient design today because, as I learned on the radio, getting ready for work today, it's apparently it's Severe Weather Awareness Day or Awareness Week. In fact, I think there's a statewide tornado drill at 1 o'clock. So if anything goes off at 1 o'clock, that's what it is if you hear it. If not, whatever. But anyway, that's something too. That would cause a tornado or something like that would cause power outages, flooding, all of those things. And it occurred to me while you were talking that sustainable is like doing better. Regenerative is actually restoring or giving back, and resilient is almost withstanding potential potential things the environment will throw at you.
Right.
All while trying to protect the safety of the occupants, and the building or / investment of the client and everything. So there's a whole synergistic piece there.
And the thing we haven't talked about yet that one of the things that's driving resilient design is insurance companies. If you look at a graph of the number of natural disasters that happen in the United States, the dollar amount is going up and up and up and up and up and up. And insurance companies are paying that.
A lot.
I mean, there's also FEMA and other groups, but still, insurance companies are bearing the brunt of that. And what we are now starting to see is insurance companies taking whole markets and saying, nope, I'm not going to insure in Florida. I'm not going to insure in California. And institutional clients, whether healthcare facilities, higher education, people who have campuses and or a conglomeration of buildings are starting to see this from their insurance companies, that there are brown areas of insurance where they say, yeah, I'll insure you, but your building is next to a floodplain, and I think you have a high risk of flooding, so your insurance rates are going to go way up.
I see.
You know? And if you design to this resilient design system, or can show me the actions you've taken to flood-proof your building, then I will give you a discount on insurance.
That sort of leads me into the next area where we can talk about what, as an advocate of these design principles, when you're talking to clients, for instance, university clients, that's one thing. There's also, you mentioned urban planning. There's also counties, cities.
Of course.
So what sort of different challenges do you get between those client types when you're talking about these principles?
Sure. For university clients, it's about recognizing what buildings do they have that are at risk. So Ferris State was a client. They sent me a video of their building flooding because they got 4 inches of rain in an hour.
Oh.
And the video is great because you can see the water outside and leaping through all of the vestibule doors that is being shot from the inside. So you can see the water pouring in. They will care about that particular building. Maybe that building doesn't need to have a capital investment anymore because it's at risk for flooding. It's had repeated damage. It has all this money that you have to, invest in it to keep it operational as a building. All right, I'm going to tear down that building and build it somewhere else that's less risky, less inclined for flooding. So that sort of investment question can come to mind for any institutional client. It can also be that, like that example of research. Do you have any facilities that you have to have 24/7 access or has to be operational in the cases of a blackout? And so municipal clients would care about that because you have to have emergency safety operations. When it comes to cities, what's your plan for the heat wave? Heat kills more people than any natural disaster in the U.S. every year. Heat. Because people can't afford to run their air conditioning if they have air conditioning, if they're in a poorer community. And so if I'm a city, then if I'm building a cooling center, I'm going to put it in the poorest area of town that I can, because those are people who are going to need it the most. It's that back to that rubber band. The people who have money have the capability to withstand more of that stressor than people who don't have resources.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation, because that opens up a lot of thinking in my mind. As you were talking, you were almost assuming like I was a client, like I had set up before, and you've talked about asking questions, and that seems like an important step as professionals. So when for our Fishbeck team, for the people that meet with clients, business development folks, or obviously architects and urban planners, but even those that for cross-marketing purposes, what are some key questions that they can either ask or be on the lookout for when they're talking with clients in ways that they can at least get these principles in front of them, make them think about them?
We always ask the questions on what is the program? What do you need to do in this building or this facility? How much space do you need for water treatment? Or what space do you need for labs? What space do you need for offices? And as part of that, it's not only should we be asking how much space, what's the quality of the space, but then those questions about sustainability. Do you want to, avoid certain types of materials or design, better facilities for the staff that you have? You have staff that have to be on call for, 18 hours a day. You may be designing rooms that they can take a nap in, that sort of thing. And so it's questioning, and then questioning beyond what they might normally think. And then resilience becomes part of that in what systems can you not have go down? Or what things are you worried about in terms of, in the risks that exist to your being able to work in that building?
I imagine that at some point in these discussions, and you alluded to it several minutes back about cost, the cost of do I have the budget for this kind of thing? Because typically, at least my understanding is, some of these principles may cost more upfront, and so that may be a harder sell for super budget focused clients, and aren't they all usually?
Yes.
So is there a technique? I mean, I'm sure there's money savings eventually. So so how do you navigate those issues?
I think for a lot of the cases, it can be, what can you do up front that is just common sense things that don't actually cost anymore. I can design a building that doesn't have a lot of windows that face west. That's the hardest elevation to try and keep cool, because it's direct low sun from the west. It's very hot. You only need to have an office that faces west once, and you're like, oh boy, do I get that.
Or if you've driven from the east side to West Michigan, for Michigan folks, around sunset, and it is just blazing.
Right.
Oh, man.
And so I can design a building that doesn't have windows that face west so much, or design them differently. That will reduce the cooling load, which reduces the mechanical load, which reduces the electrical load. Like, the downward cascade is good. It didn't require anything except for us to think about it up front. Resilient design can be very similar, especially when it comes to things like flood. We don't always know where floods are going to happen, but we also have some good historical data that says, well, this is where it happened before. And now with the increase in the intensity of rainstorms these days, it's going to get much worse. So we have to be able to expand that a little bit. So I'm not going to even stay like 50 yards away from a flood line. I'm going to be 100 yards away if I can. And it's planning. For some things, it absolutely is going to be more. I'm not going to make a mass timber building that's going to cost the same as a steel building. We're not there yet. That technology isn't there yet. It's still going to be costing more. But for some clients, that will be important to them. And they say, yes, I want to put money to that thing, and I can give it up for something else.
This is just so neat. All this stuff that I don't know much about it. So talking with you, I'm learning more. But we're coming to the end of our time. So in some closing thoughts, what advice would you offer to professionals here that are looking to embed these principles into their design thinking, more deeply into their work?
There are a lot of resources out there. It's like anything you want to learn, just have an open mind and ask questions.
Call Kristen.
Or
right?
You can call me. Absolutely. Yep. And I'm always happy to talk about it more.
Good. One more thing, since are there any emerging trends in these areas that are catching on that we can be on the lookout for?
Yeah, I think sustainability, people have a pretty good sense of that. It's been around for a couple decades. Various institutions have goals that they've set, we want to be net zero by 2030 or 2035 or 2040, whatever. And people have an understanding of that. Resilient design, I don't think people get yet.
Okay.
And that's the thing I think we're going to see a lot more of as it's affecting all of the things that we build.
Okay. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
All right, great. Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Kristen, thank you so much for coming on here and sharing your expertise. It's been great to learn how these things sort of shape the way we plan and build. Thank you for joining us for this episode, and we'll see you next time on the Fishbeck Learning Exchange.